Hello, honeys, and welcome to your source for weekly arts news updates, hand-picked headlines by an art historian, yours truly. This week we're covering February 8th through the 14th. Happy Valentine's, by the way. And since we don't really have any announcements to make this week, we'll just remind you about our source document linked in the episode description and get started. Starting with some follow-up stories today, the Centre Pompidou's New Jersey Museum has officially been canceled after the local mayor pulled his support. The city's mayor made the announcement on Wednesday of the last week, and Centre Pompidou spokespeople confirmed that the museum was no longer pursuing the project the very next day. Officially known as Centre Pompidou x Jersey City, the collaboration was first announced in 2021 and would have been the only North American satellite, in addition to existing ones in Shanghai and Malaga, Spain, operated by Paris's biggest museum of modern and contemporary art, which is currently closed in France for renovations. Now, why it failed is the interesting part. Republican lawmakers began to raise concerns about the project in 2023 on claims that the museum would cost $200 million, with some 58 of that coming from the pockets of taxpayers. The state pulled the money after months of back and forth, causing the plan to quote-unquote implode, as Art News writes. The rebooted version of the plan has also now been abandoned. And another potential why we care here, the potential financial implications, much less public access loss, could be enormous, yet the basis for the decision is pretty obviously partisan, as the newly elected mayor, James Solomon, quote, had railed against the project prior to his election, end quote, according to Art News. The project itself was begun under the mayorship of Steve Fulop, who warned when leaving office last month that Jersey City would lose money if the institution was not realized. Fulop told NJ.com that reversing plans would, quote, cost tens of millions of dollars, end quote. It remains unclear at this point how much money Jersey City actually did ultimately spend on the Pompidou project, but estimates based on publicly available info suggest several million dollars. We also heard that the Museum of Fine Arts Boston will create a People in Culture position amid denying targeting minorities in its recent layoffs. In a February 10th interview with The Culture Show, the director of the museum, Pierre Terhanian, responded at length to accusations that the institution disproportionately targeted people of color when it recently fired 33 employees, once again denying any form of racial profiling or complicity with the Trump administration's anti-DEI policies. Tarhanian also announced the creation of that position within the museum's Human Resources Department, reportedly designed to create a, quote, sense of belonging and inclusion, end quote, while enabling more upward mobility opportunities for staff. He did say that he understood public frustration and noted that he recognizes having 7 out of its 34 curators be people of color is still not enough, but that, quote, we're not walking back on our values, we're not walking back on our commitments, that we're in an existential moment, in a bind where we actually have to stabilize this museum, end quote. Terhanian added that the museum will soon reopen its galleries showcasing Indigenous voices in, quote, a presentation that took 3 years of planning and hard work, including by the museum's only Native American curator, Marina Taikuyenko, who was among the people just fired, and quote, in our sources' words. Meanwhile, the Philadelphia Museum of Art's chief of staff and CFO departed last week as chaos continues at the institution. The Philadelphia Inquirer reports that the chief of staff, Maggie Fairs, is expected to leave by the end of February, and CFO Valerie McDuffie's final day would be Friday of last week. Fairs was appointed to her post by Sasha Suda, who has since sued the institution for wrongful termination after being fired in November from her post as director and CEO for an unspecified quote-unquote cause. The marketing chief who led the rebrand effort resigned in January, after which point the museum undid the controversial rebrand to return to its old name. But the future of the institution is still in question, as new director Daniel H. Weiss previously stated that the museum is facing an unsustainable deficit. It's not yet clear whether this month's departures were in any way related. We also learned that the Trump administration removed the pride flag from Stonewall, but elected officials reinstated it on their own. Gay City News first reported on the flag's subtly completed removal from the first national monument in the U.S. dedicated to LGBTQ+ rights and history, designated in 2016 on Monday of last week, meaning it likely happened over the weekend, in accordance with a January 21st memo from the Trump administration banning the flying of quote-unquote non-agency flags at National Park Service sites. This led several New York City and state elected officials, including New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani, and New York State Governor Kathy Hochul to publicly condemn the removal. Hundreds of supporters, plus some of those same officials, then gathered to reinstate it on a smaller flagpole at the site on Thursday afternoon. Now, we care about this removal because it comes at a time when the Trump administration has continued its crackdown on national monuments and erasure of what it considers quote-unquote anti-American history, as well as attacking the rights and representation of LGBTQ plus people. Signatories to a letter addressed to the president, as well as Interior Secretary Doug Burgum and National Park Service Acting Director Jessica Boron, called the pride flag's removal an act of quote-unquote erasure, which, quote, lands as a warning. It tells LGBTQ plus Americans that their dignity is conditional and that even the most iconic symbol of their struggle can be stripped away, end quote. NPS also removed references to transgender and queer activists on the park's website last year. This flag removal can therefore, and should therefore, be seen as an escalation or a next step in this American queer history erasure process. I'm sure we need no reminder that Trump has consistently threatened the rights and dignity of queer people during his second term, especially by targeting trans and non-binary individuals via signing executive orders requiring the government to define gender as male-female on a binary on his day of inauguration, banning trans athletes from women's sports, restricting healthcare for trans youth, and several other actions. And since we're talking politics, the Italian Prime Minister's face was erased from a Rome fresco after the Vatican complained about it. The image in question appeared in a chapel of the Basilica of St. Lawrence in Lucina, where artist Bruno Valentinetti restored a fresco he originally painted in 2000, and which he denied having this resemblance to Italy's right-wing Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni. Valentinetti removed the image 2 weeks ago at the Vatican's request after Italy's Culture Ministry and the Diocese of Rome opened an inquiry into the work. Italy's Culture Ministry issued a statement then Wednesday of last week before noting that any further restoration work in the church would require formal authorization from the property's owner, the Religious Buildings Fund of the Interior Ministry, as well as the Vicariate and Rome's Special Superintendency. So, pretty big push for stronger oversight after that little incident. And in a bit of good news, Amy Sherald's show has set a visitor record at the Baltimore Museum of Art. The institution made the announcement of that new attendance record this week. The museum became a venue for American Sublime in November of last year after Sherald withdrew her exhibition from the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery, citing censorship concerns, especially regarding one painting in the show titled Transforming Liberty from 2024. According to a museum spokesperson reached by Hyperallergic, attendance stood at 63,000 as of Monday, February 9th, and is expected to peak at over 75,000 by the time the show closes on April 5th. The Why We Care here, these numbers make Sherald's mid-career survey the museum's most attended show since 2000, which is even more remarkable of a feat given that the Baltimore Museum of Art was not an original destination on the exhibition's itinerary. And even more impressive, responses to the museum's survey to evaluate the show's reception revealed high rates of out-of-state and under the age of 50 attendees, and that almost a quarter of the respondents had visited the museum for the very first time to see American Sublime. That means that representational art matters to the American public, and they are willing to support it even if they aren't really quote-unquote arts people. Some pretty shocking international news, brand new news, I should clarify. According to the South China Morning Post, an investigation into one of China's premier state-run cultural institutions, the Nanjing Museum, found that decades of systemic mismanagement and corruption enabled the secret sale of national treasures into the private art market. The scandal began last September after the museum was accused of selling donated paintings, and the resulting case blew up in December, focused on its former director, so technically this is a follow-up too. But investigators conducted more than 1,100 interviews and reviewed 65,000 archival documents in their probe. They ultimately concluded that several of the 5 disputed works donated in 1959 by the family of collector Pang Lai-chen had been unethically removed from the museum's collection and either sold or lost over the decades. 3 out of the 5 had been recovered by December, 1 was found miscatalogued, and 1 is still missing. The Nanjing Museum apologized publicly to the Pang family Monday of last week. Former Vice Director Xu Huping is now also under formal disciplinary and supervisory review for quote-unquote serious duty-related violations, along with 24 other officials from the Provincial Culture and Relics Department, as well as the department's commercial store. Jiangsu authorities have since ordered reforms to the museum's donation oversight and launched a province-wide safety review of all state-run museums, libraries, and galleries. Now, the why we care here, pretty obvious. This extreme violation of public benefit-centered duties, since the report found that, quote, state assets were lost, damaging the credibility of state-owned museums, end quote. This is also kind of bad timing for the national government, since Beijing has been working to elevate the country's global cultural profile in the last few years. Headlines also announced that Israel has moved to expand control over ancient West Bank sites in a new bill, which would, quote, give Heritage Minister Amichai Eliyahu, quote, sweeping authority, and enter quote, to appoint the governing council, designate antiquity sites, and expropriate land and artifacts across the West Bank, end quote, according to Art News. This was approved for first reading by the Israeli Knesset's Ministerial Committee on Legislation on February 8th. The advocacy groups Peace Now and the Geneva Initiative, together with the Israeli NGO Emek Shaveh, called the bill an, quote, extraterritorial annexation, end quote, that, quote, poses a serious threat to the viability of a negotiated two-state solution, end quote, in a joint statement on the matter. They further warned that the legislation would violate the 1954 Hague Convention and the Fourth Geneva Convention, quote, which prohibit an occupying power from making permanent institutional changes or exercising sovereign rights, end quote, as well as, quote, effectively dismantling the Oslo II Accords of 1993 and 95, which assigned civilian responsibility for antiquities to the Palestinian Authority, end quote, while recognizing it as a shared heritage of both states. The legislation, understandably, is drawing condemnation as a violation, therefore, of international law and a further escalation of its annexation of Palestinian territory. It is especially being seen so on the heels of last week's announcement by the Israeli authorities of plans to seize an archaeological site overlooking the West Bank town of Sebastia. An increasing number of local and international critics are viewing this new antiquities bill as the latest move to undermine Palestinian land ownership in the area and to accelerate the expansion of Jewish settlements. These critics notably include foreign ministers of Egypt, Jordan, the United Arab Emirates, Indonesia, Pakistan, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar, who issued a joint statement denouncing the bill and warning against, quote, the continued expansionist Israeli policies and illegal measures pursued by the Israeli government in the occupied West Bank, which fuel violence and conflict in the region, end quote. We also heard about advocates for the incarcerated protesting the removal of artworks from UK court facilities after a February 10th report from the Independent Monitor, lay observers, found that some facilities operated by the government contractor Serco, quote, initially put up the artwork, end quote, created by inmates at Doncaster Prison in courts in England and Wales, which was commissioned by the government's prisoner escort and custody services to adorn custody suites, but, quote, quickly removed it following instructions from Serco management. No satisfactory explanation has been given as to why one supplier permits this while another does not, end quote. Custody suites, for those who don't know, are secure facilities connected to courthouses, many of which were underground and have limited natural light, where people would wait their turn to appear before a judge or magistrate, and this project was being done in order to brighten these environments and help prisoners reflect on their experiences in court. Examples of the works created by inmates in the report include brightly hued scenes showing people in landscapes accompanied by inspirational quotes from popular figures from Madonna to Churchill. And we care about this because the report not only found, quote, deep and persistent systemic problems, unquote, in the systems by which people are detained, transported, and appear in court, it also reveals the ways in which losing art access in these spaces is bad for everyone. The report effectively argues that having art present in these spaces has a positive impact on staff, improving their decision-making and thereby leading to better outcomes for detained people. It also helps people in custody as it, in the words of fellow Art in Prisons company Pictora's director, Robert Morrill, quote, build self-esteem, confidence, and soft skills that link to employability. It can be a key to positive resettlement and the reduction of reoffending, which currently costs the country in terms of economic and social costs around £18.1 billion, end quote. Staying in London for a moment, we heard that their National Gallery will cut jobs amid a growing deficit. The art newspaper reports the institution is ending some unspecified activities, quote, whose costs can no longer be justified, end quote, and launching a, quote, voluntary exit scheme, end quote, in an attempt to beat back a looming £8.2 million or 11.17 million US dollar deficit by the year 2026 through 2027, brought on by increasing running costs, this inflation, fewer visitors opting to pay for temporary exhibitions, and more. If the voluntary departures don't relieve enough pressure, though, employees will be forced out. This news is surprising given the September announcement of two record-breaking £150 million donations toward the funding of a major new 20th through 21st century arts extension called Project Domani. This also demonstrates the international downturn in museum financial stability, thinking back to the Museum of Fine Arts Boston and many other staff cuts that we've covered in the last few months. And bringing it back stateside, according to a criminal complaint filed on Wednesday of last week, former treasurer of the Hearthstone Historic House Museum in Appleton, Wisconsin, Stephen Jahnke, confessed to embezzlement and now faces one count of theft in a business setting. Hearthstone is touted as, quote, the only building still standing from the dawn of electricity, end quote, on its website, with features like original Edison electroliers, original light switches, and, quote, some of the world's only examples of original Edison wiring in situ, end quote. Local radio station WTAQ reported that board members became, quote, suspicious of transactions apparently not related to museum operations, end quote, including cruises, property taxes, Amazon purchases, vacation travel, and vehicle repair. Additionally, quote, some accounts deposited through the community foundation were depleted despite having a restricted status, end quote. According to the criminal complaint, Jahnke claimed he sometimes, quote, confused his personal cards with the museum's card, end quote, but stated he did indeed embezzle funds to pay for his own expenses. And of course, the Why We Care here, major boo to this guy giving us all a bad rap and taking away from funds given by the public or even private entities in the spirit of conservation. Not cool, man. Looking over to the southwest, though, the University of North Texas shuttered an exhibition of artworks critical of ICE last week. Victor Quiñones, also known as Marca 27, a Mexican-American artist whose work centers immigrant experiences, said the school closed his show Ni de Aquí ni de Allá, Spanish for neither from here nor from there, which opened February 3rd at the College of Visual Arts and Design galleries without notice. He stated to our sources he instead learned of the closure and removal of the exhibition information from schools' websites via social media messages from students at the university. And the Why We Care here, such an obvious example of censorship, or at least poor ethics in terms of exhibition cancellation, in a time when the majority of Americans believe that ICE has gone too far. Quiñones' practice centers on, like I said, this lived experience of immigrants and their inhumane treatment by federal agencies. Hyperallergic writes that his works are, quote, both tributes to Latina immigrant culture and searing critiques of the violence inflicted by ICE, end quote. And the decision to cancel the show, said Quiñones, proves, quote, that they, the university, don't think about how it affects the approximately 1/4 of the 11,000 person student body who identifies as Hispanic and whether or not they feel supported and seen, end quote, noting the recent national trend of suppression against any anti-ICE anything, saying, quote, what we need more than anything right now is for galleries and museums and institutions to step up and show important work that speaks to the challenges in our country, end quote. The university has not replied to our sources' requests for comment nor issued a public statement about the exhibition closure at the time of this recording. Next up, a bit of an oddball story for the Honeys. A minerals company wants access to colonial-era records about the Congo held by a Belgian museum. The Financial Times reports that the Congolese government and Cobalt Minerals, a mining and AI company backed by billionaires like Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates, are seeking access to documents, including geological records, which are housed at the Africa Museum in Tervuren, Belgium, formerly known as the Royal Museum for Central Africa. Reuters confirmed the deal between the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Cobalt in 2025, which put the company in a good spot to acquire one of the world's largest lithium deposits at Monono. Lithium is, of course, crucial for electric vehicle battery development. The museum began digitizing the documents in question last year and confirmed that copies would be supplied to the Congolese authorities, despite Belgian government's spokespeople stating that Belgium, quote, cannot grant privileged or exclusive access to a foreign private company with which it has no contractual relationship, end quote. So we care because there's this Cold War-esque race for minerals resources between Western companies and or nations against Chinese and Russian companies and or nations, but more importantly, the not all that great history of museum and resource extraction in the area heightens the tensions inherently caused by Western companies moving in for more. The museum's predecessor, the Royal Museum, was opened in 1897 as a means for King Leopold II to demonstrate the wealth of cultural objects as well as natural resources obtained from the region. Our sources remind us that, quote, millions of Congolese people were subjected to starvation, mutilation, and death while enslaved or otherwise forced to submit to Leopold's extractive regime, end quote. But recent bad blood casts the Belgium/extraction thing in general in even worse light. There was a 2019 blackface controversy caused by party attendance for which the museum had to publicly apologize, and Belgium announced that it would transfer ownership of hundreds of objects from the Congo that were illegally added to its holdings, principally works from the collection of the Africa Museum in 2021, yet that process is ongoing and very, very slow. In less controversial news, Aquavella Galleries is planning an ambitious 50-work Matisse exhibition this spring. It says, Matisse, The Pursuit of Harmony will run April 9th through May 22nd and will bring together 50 paintings, sculptures, and works on paper, which span about half a century of the artist's career. And we are happy to hear this headline because of the unique and public nature of the display. The works on view will come from major collections, the Phillips Collection, Cleveland Museum of Art, MoMA, etc., which have not been brought together in years. And this will be the first exhibition devoted entirely to Matisse at Aquavella since 1973. It arrives also at a time when blue-chip masterpieces are frequently restricted in access to private sales conducted behind closed doors, so a really awesome opportunity for the public to lay eyes upon some masterpieces. Another bit of good news, Morocco has announced its first national pavilion exhibition at the Venice Biennale Arsenal. The art newspaper writes that the exhibit, located in the Salle dei Artiglieri, will feature a monumental installation by Amina Aguesne centered on the theme of ritual weaving. We also learned that a Joe Frazier statue will officially replace the beloved Rocky at the bottom of the Philadelphia Museum steps. The Philadelphia Art Commission has officially selected that replacement artwork of real-life Philadelphian boxer Frazier, which is currently exhibited outside the sports complex in South Philly to take the place of the Rocky statue, which is moving from the bottom of the stairs to the top. The why we care about this headline, though, critics of the rearrangement plan have argued that it isn't a balanced enough one, as the monument to a fictitious boxer will be placed literally and metaphorically above Frazier, whose accomplishments included becoming the first boxer to defeat Muhammad Ali. Writes columnist Stephanie Farr of the Philadelphia Inquirer, quote, at this time, we should not be elevating fiction in Philadelphia as the federal government is attempting to erase our facts, end quote. Our sources also point out that while Rocky gets the title billing in a show about monuments opening at the museum in April, Frazier will apparently not be featured at all. And our final segment for today, the Shitty People one. More of the art world ties to Epstein that we found out via the file releases. If you don't care to hear about this stuff, go ahead and skip about 5 minutes to the end. This one's a bit of a follow-up. His Epstein connections have prompted Jack Lang to resign from the Institut du Monde Arabe presidency. Ties between Lang, who held key roles in the French government between the 1980s and the 2000s, and Epstein were revealed in the trove of files released late last month, in which Lang is mentioned nearly 700 times, according to Art Forum. BBC reports that Lang was introduced to Epstein through actor/director Woody Allen about 15 years ago, suggesting that their initial meeting took place after Epstein's 2008 conviction on charges of soliciting a minor for prostitution. Le Monde, among other local medias, revealed that Lang apparently asked the financier and others for funds and favors, including the use of Epstein's car and private plane on several occasions. French authorities opened an investigation into Lang on suspicion of, quote, laundering tax fraud proceeds, end quote, following the reveal of these connections. Le Figaro, meanwhile, has reported that French publisher Gallimard has also suspended the publication of a new book by Lang about the former French president Francois Mitterrand due to the revelation of these ties. Another person on our crap list, prominent collector and Navy Secretary John Phelan, who, according to various reports, flew on the private plane of the convicted sex offender in 2006, 4 months before he was first indicted in Florida. A close friend of the secretary confirmed that Phelan was on the flight, quote, but emphasized it was the only time Phelan interacted with Epstein and that he was invited to fly by Bear Stearns CEO Jimmy Kine, who died in 2021, end quote. He went on to claim that the secretary did not know this was Epstein's plane. We'll see. And Bard College president Leon Botstein, the head of the influential liberal arts school since 1975, came under fire last week after the release of emails with Epstein revealed the two had a relationship much more personal than had been previously disclosed. Botstein previously characterized his communications with Epstein as part of an ongoing fundraising effort for Bard, but Art News writes, quote, Botstein had sent Epstein a grateful note regarding a 2012 trip to the Caribbean that he recently claimed not to remember in detail, including whether his visit included time on Epstein's notorious private island, end quote. A spokesperson for Botstein claimed that in regards to an email written to Epstein after that trip, which read, quote, I had a great time, the place is great, end quote, the sentiment replied to, quote, the overall environment of St. Thomas, an area which was new to Dr. Botstein, end quote. Still, news reports from more than one outlet claim that these previously undisclosed messages, quote, show how the college president gave the convicted felon access to Bard's orbit, suggesting deeper ties than Botstein has so far acknowledged, end quote. And that is our show for the day. Remember to subscribe, follow, like, comment, send us a DM if you have a question or a burning thought about anything. We'll be back next week. In the meantime, hydrate or dihydrate, enjoy the ever so slowly warming up weather, and take care. We'll talk soon. Highbrow Honey's music was created by Chris Meinhold. The editing, fact-checking, hosting, researching, producing, etc. was done by Celia Bugno, master's degree holder in art history. Remember to subscribe to our Patreon and our Substack for even more exclusive access and fantastic arts historical content.